I love organizational culture. I'm a big culture nerd. Everybody's got a culture, whether they think so or not. And a lot of times your culture isn't what you think it is. And you know as well as anybody how quickly that can change. It comes from the top, but you hire the wrong person or the wrong people, and pretty soon things change as long as you tolerate it.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Today is the last of the dog days of August, which means it's time for our monthly roundup of HR news. And this month, I'm joined by my buddy, Steve Peglar. Steve is Deputy Executive Director and Head of HR and Organizational Development for the Housing Authority of Travis County, Texas. He also assists employers across the state through his consulting practice, HR Strategies of Texas. Steve has over 30 years of experience in HR management and consulting, and while he has all sorts of certifications and has served on too many nonprofit boards to count, and he's an amazing mentor to emerging professionals, his most notable resume item is that he was my third guest on this podcast way back in 2021. Welcome back to Good Morning HR, Steve.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be back. And I just now learned that I was your third guest. So that's pretty cool. You know, that was a long time ago, but not really.
Yeah, but we've made a lot of improvements since then.
Yeah, you guys are really high tech now.
I tell you what.
But very happy to be back.
Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
And yeah, you've had a lot change since then. You were in Fort Worth when we did that, and now you're living down in Austin. And and I think it's somebody's got to live in Austin, so I'm glad it's you and not me. So
well, we're loving it.
Yeah,
so yes,
good.
Great place. Fort Worth was great too. You know.
Well, Fort Worth and Austin are a lot
anyway.
alike. I always say Fort Worth is like Austin except for the traffic, and you get rid of the traffic.
It's getting worse up there too.
It is
getting worse. Yeah.
Thank God for 130. I was in San Antonio for a hub event this past week and took the 130 loop around, and that's the way to go if you're going through Central Texas, guys.
It'll save you some time for sure.
So speaking of Texas, and we're here in the Fifth Circuit, let's start with a surprising decision from the Fifth Circuit, only because I didn't know there was a precedent. I assumed that this decision was already there. Dallas County, which should surprise nobody that they've got unique issues over there. They had a sex-based staffing policy for their county jailers. And basically, men could take the full weekends off, both days, but women could only, at a maximum, take one weekend day off. And I'm sure it was a staffing issue, and they needed female jailers for their female inmates, and they probably don't have nearly as many female jailers as they would like. And it's probably a very difficult job to recruit for to start with. But so that was their policy. Men can get the full weekends off, but women only get one weekend day off, which shocks me that they had that policy, because I would have thought on its face that's a Title VII violation. But apparently the Fifth Circuit here in Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma was the one circuit in the country that had a different standard, and they'd only focused on the ultimate employment decision, like hiring, retention, those kind of things, but not the terms and conditions of employment like scheduling. And so the court reversed that and took it back to what the rest of the country did, and what I've always assumed was the law here is you just can't treat people different based on their sex.
Right.
I was shocked that it even existed.
I was really surprised to read that too. And actually, that was the first time I've heard the term ultimate employment decision, and I mean, it makes sense what they're referring to, but, you get into these kind of ancillary areas like scheduling, which this was a scheduling issue or a scheduling practice. But it was really interesting to learn that there was a difference there for this circuit.
Well, and it kind of alarms me because I've it suggests that I've kind of been telling clients wrong on some of these issues that have come up over the last 20 years. But in reality, the decision makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And even if you don't look at just the strict legal issue, I mean, Title VII compliance is one thing, legally to stay out of court and all that, but just attracting and retaining employees. I can only imagine, maybe it was harder for Dallas County to recruit female jailers because they would tell them you're only going to get, you're never going to get a full weekend off.
Well, and you kind of wonder how widespread that information was. That might have been, not have been something that they even learned about until they got in the door
Right.
and were employed. And then, obviously word spread, but, that's, yeah, exactly. And retention, I mean, it's all about, we all work hard enough to find the best people and we got to retain them. And that's not a good practice. So, I'm glad to see that it was addressed and clarified, and now we're kind of on the same page as the rest of the country. But very interesting to me too. Totally agree.
And I thought it was interesting to have a Title VII issue come up about sex, male and female, because so much of the Title VII stuff we've heard is more around DEI stuff and what's legal or illegal there. The idea, with affirmative, we talked last month on the news episode about the affirmative action decision regarding college admissions and what that might mean for HR. We've all age, race, sex, or all that stuff, but to see a decision, even something come into question just around straight sex, not even gender differences, just straight sex differences. It feels like we're in the 1990s to have a decision come out that way.
Yeah, it seems like it's, we've been there, done that, or should have been there and done that, but the bottom line recommendations, and of course, neither one of us are legally attorneys.
Oh, for sure. I kept my soul. Yeah.
Yeah. The recommendation is we got to keep doing the anti-discrimination training.
Right.
So, which I can help you with, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But, call Steve.
Yeah. So, it's important to keep doing that, and especially now.
And of course, and I think we've had this conversation, I've had it with a lot of other folks. I don't like the term anti-discrimination training nearly as much as I like the idea of equitable treatment and, and just saying we're going to treat everybody fairly and samely, regardless of, rather than framing it in the negative. I think that's one of the problems that and we're going to talk about it, the so-called woke movement has, is that they're focusing too much on the anti and not enough on the idea that everybody deserves treatment, and we just need to build systems around to ensure that everybody gets treated fairly. But I'm sure you and I are going to stumble over each other's toes here in a little bit on some of that. So, but speaking of Title VII and DEI stuff, Starbucks got sued by, this time, not, they're getting it from the left and the right. Those poor guys at Starbucks, it's the old Norm line from Cheers. It's a dog eat dog world, and I've got milk bone underpants, because they've got the unions on one side beating them up and painting them as these arch conservative villains, and then they've got the conservatives on the other side beating them up because they're too woke. So they got sued by a conservative group that went out and they bought this conservative group bought 56 shares of Starbucks stock, which, by the way, at today's current price is about $5,300 worth of shares. And then set themselves up as shareholders and sued Starbucks for anti-white discrimination policies, saying that those policies are going to put Starbucks at risk for Title VII cases and hurt Starbucks' share price. And saying especially Starbucks' efforts to increase the number of non-white employees that they had, the amount of money they were setting aside to spend to recruit. They weren't setting quotas for the number of people they're going to hire, but money they're going to spend to recruit minority and spend with minority-owned media companies, and then increasing spending on diverse suppliers. So, you know, they're doing what Starbucks is doing what most companies are already doing, right? I mean, for years we've known we can't do quality, we can't do quotas, and so if you've got an affirmative action plan, what are you doing? And you're falling short. You're going out there and reaching out to special interest groups and trying to recruit and the Black Chamber of Commerce or this networking group or whatever to get a diverse population. But they got sued by these conservative groups, and the court didn't make any decision based on the merits of the case, except that they didn't have standing. They didn't have enough stock to say that they could really represent a shareholder group.
Yeah.
But are you surprised by any of this?
Well, I mean, I think Starbucks that's a unique case, and I totally understand what you're saying about they're getting hit from all sides. Not every organization is, and the whole DEI world has really changed fast. I mean, just a couple of years ago, it was all the rage. There was lots of jobs out there for these, DEI directors and everybody else within a function like that getting hired. And it's like they turned off the faucet, and there's definitely a shift there. From a strategic point of view, I don't really understand the big pushback against it overall. I think it's, I think it's a little more harmless than a lot of people think. It's not something that really we wouldn't have been doing anyway in a different form, or should have been doing actually. But, the world's changing too. And living in Austin now, after 3 years, didn't have to be here this long to tell, but it's a different sort of, it's very youth oriented here. And these concerns are real when it comes to social issues, and everything that falls under DEI. And, you got younger people that this is a huge deal to. I see it every day. I've got clients that I work with that, this comes up. It's real. And, us old guys, we may not understand it like we think we do. But it's embedded and ingrained now. I don't really think the conservatives won the culture war. I really don't. And probably won't. This kind of thing is going to stick around. Now there'll be a lot of crazy activity surrounding it, and right now there's a backlash against DEI clearly, but there's a reality there that I don't think we could ignore. Especially when it comes to like gender identity, some of these other social issues. And you talk to younger people now, and it's they have a different perspective on the world.
Right. And I think that's totally right. I think that's, and if you want to recruit, whether it's an engineer or a barista or whatever, under the age of 40, you're going to have a certain kind of culture. But I also think that some employers have, like after George Floyd's murder, and he was murdered, listeners, you can stop listening if you don't agree. That's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings. But, after that, or a lot of the social unrest from 2020 and all of that, a lot of employers swung, overreacted, performatively. And I think that was, I think a lot of it was just cynical.
And that's a good description.
Yeah.
That's a good description. It was a reaction.
Yeah. And they, and rather than say, okay, let's take a moment and look at what our systems, what our processes, are we getting the outcomes we should, given the workforce we're trying to recruit, given the customers that we serve, are we getting the outcomes that we really need to be successful? Okay, let's tweak those systems to see how we can do that. Let's make a change, test it, and see what happens. Plan, do, check, act. I mean, the thing we've been doing for 100 years.
Yeah.
But rather than do that, they ran out and did a lot of performative stuff. They hired a lot of DEI consultants and a lot of people who only got the job. I mean, I've met a number of them at conferences, and I can tell you a lot of those folks that were DEI experts it was the amount of melanin in their skin was their only qualification. I'm sorry. And
Yeah.
I thought that was as cynical as anything else out there. And so a lot of those jobs are going white because they shouldn't be, unless you've got a tragically bad organization. They shouldn't be a separate position. They should be incorporated into your management from the ground up. That should be part of HR. It should be part of your leadership and
Right.
changing the culture that way. And so I think a lot of those folks are losing their jobs because people are realizing this isn't how we get the change we really need.
Yeah. And, what you said a moment ago about, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, they scaled it up as a function so fast that, yeah, you could have somebody coming in with all the hiring that was going on and throwing ideas out there for metrics and things to measure that really may not have been appropriate, that anybody understood, that were not, maybe they weren't communicated. And so it's like, you know, the corporate world, if they don't see a return on it right away or in a couple of years, they're not going to invest in it. And so, unfortunately, I think a lot of companies saw it as this isn't benefiting us that we can tell. And maybe that a lot of that is because you didn't set the right metrics. You didn't, plan, do, check, act, et cetera, that we would have done in other situations. So, I don't have the solution to this, but I don't think it's going away. It's going to evolve. But yeah, there's a backlash, there's fewer jobs, but I think as a function and as a concept, it's going to be kind of embedded.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I hope that more and more it just becomes how we do business. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
regardless. And, someday we're not going to need, knock on wood. And certainly Sandra Day O'Connor thought by now the affirmative action would would have been gone anyway. But we're not going to need, even on the vendor side, on the, procurement side, set aside programs and all that. Well, but until we get there, until
Mm-hmm.
you can legitimately say that, hey, our system really does identify and develop the best people that we can, regardless of their background and all of that. There needs to be attention. We need to measure the metrics and see if we're getting what we want. And
Yeah.
you can talk about all the social justice, but it's really a business imperative. I mean, if you want your company to be successful in 30 years and you want leadership that's got experience in your organization, is matured and all that, they're going to have to be diverse. Texas now is a minority majority state. And
Yeah.
if you're seen as a company for old white guys, well, you're going to be in trouble in a few decades.
Well, and there's a lot of them out there still. And you're right. You're absolutely right. And I know that in your organization, you've always kind of been about this. And so, you know, and that's another different topic for maybe a different podcast, but, hiring to your culture. I've always kind of had a problem with that. And, you end up with the organization of a bunch of old white guys. And you'll find, like you said, you really can't compete. You don't have the bandwidth in a lot of different areas. So I've always been a believer that, diversity, and that can mean so many things, is critical. And so I'm on the same page with you. I get it.
And I'm real big on hiring to culture when the culture is intentional.
Right.
I think there are a lot of companies that have cultures, and they're cultures that happen to have worked for them for a long time, but it's just something that kind of grew up, and it was incidental, maybe even to their success. It wasn't the reason for their success, but then they see that, well, we need to hold on to this, whatever this is, and we need to keep recruiting from the same places we recruited. We need to make sure all our engineers are Aggies or whatever it is, and that doesn't serve them, But if you've got an intentional culture, you've got values that either you truly aspire to, and you're willing to hire, manage, and ultimately fire employees for for not living up to those values and not agreeing to them, then I think you're doing the right thing. But if your values are, our thing, we want people who like to go fishing with us on Saturdays, well, you're really limiting your group of potential employees. And I think, with this younger generation. I was at a business meeting not long ago where it was a conference, and the conference organizer stood up before lunch and blessed the meal. And I don't have any problem with saying, somebody saying a blessing over a meal, but it was a blessing from a very specific, religious point of view. And and my first thought was, this is a pretty large organization, and there are no doubt people here who just are realizing this isn't the culture that I would want to work in, because it doesn't fit them. And so I think we need to, we can pick our value or pick our fights, and you can have traditional Judeo-Christian values or whatever you want to call, without calling them that, and without, if it's, treat people fairly, if it's, act with compassion and respect, which is one of our values. You can do all of those things, but it's got to be in a way that people can approach it and embrace the value from their own worldview.
Yeah, and and that gets into the topic of potential religious discrimination in the workplace, and we're protected as well for freedom of no religion,
right?
And that's just as critical. And I say that as the husband of a Christian minister.
Right.
So that's just the reality. And but as far as culture, and again, different topic, maybe for a couple of podcasts, but you've got you can say all the right things, and you can publish all the right things, but then there's still there's sort of the hidden attributes of your culture that are implied. And so I love organizational culture. I'm a big culture nerd. Everybody's got a culture, whether they think so or not.
Right.
And a lot of times your culture isn't what you think it is. And as well as anybody, how quickly that can change. It comes from the top, but you hire the wrong person or the wrong people, and pretty soon things change, as long as you tolerate it.
Right. Yeah. And that's what it goes back to the, oh heck, I can't remember his name. I hate that. But that your culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated.
Yeah.
And that's what your values. I mean, you have a culture, you also have value, you have organizational values, whether you've written them down or not. There are certain behaviors that get people
Absolutely.
awarded,
Yeah.
and certain things that we don't as an organization value. And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're in North Texas, I want to make sure that you're aware of Fort Worth HR's Strategic Mindset Conference on September 15th. This conference is good for 6 hours of recertification credit, and if you're an SBHR, these are those ever elusive business credits. The topics are wide-ranging: technology, business strategy, workforce analytics, finance, it's all there. You can get more information and register for the Fort Worth HR Strategic Mindset Conference at fwhr.org. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 3/4 of a recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 111 and enter the keyword Peglar. That's Peglar. And now back to my conversation with Steve Peglar. While we're talking about religion, let's get into the most contentious social issue out there: abortion. There was a study by Glassdoor and Indeed, and the top line finding in the headlines everywhere that I saw it referenced was that employers who post the Dobbs versus Jackson decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, employers who promoted in their job postings that they were that they had abortion-related benefits for employees, got 8% more clicks on their job postings. And I think we can, the biggest mistake a lot of people make in marketing is counting clicks as anything of value versus actual, conversions and people buying your product. And I think that may be a part of the problem here too, because a lot of people probably were just like, what are these folks doing? And they were clicking through to see what happened. So, are you you seeing much in that way and down in Austin?
Well, not necessarily, but this falls back under the umbrella, of DEI, the basic function in that, well, it sort of does, but we're getting potentially political here. I think the big takeaway from this is, again, here we are, how many decades later talking about this? It's never really been settled. And people are, they grasp onto one side or the other here. And, I think when an employer indicates, they're going to cover this kind of benefit or other politically charged benefits, employee benefits, they get the attention of people that may appreciate their culture or not, because it reveals a lot clearly. And, it sends a signal, however effective or sought after that benefit really is. Again, I'll use the example of people I've encountered in Austin, younger people, tech oriented, tech firm employees, that kind of thing. They pay attention to this stuff. This is a real thing. Now, you mentioned some statistics there. It may not be a great thing even for the employer that advertises this, or, the idea is out there that their culture looks like this. But I don't know enough to speak to that, but I will tell you, this is the kind of issue that there are people that really care about it, that are, sought after in the marketplace. So you got to pay attention to this as an employer.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think it goes back to a lot of the social justice progressive stuff. I think a lot of it is kind of cynical on a lot of employers' parts. They saw the Dobbs decision, and so they thought it'd be a great recruiting tool, because it's one thing to have that policy. It's another thing to put it on the, prominently in your job postings, to the point that people click through to it, so they see it right away. So it's not that we're looking for an excellent engineer. It's, hey, we've got, we believe in women's reproductive freedom. Those are, that just comes across kind of icky to me.
Yeah.
Because it seems performative.
Yeah.
And, and maybe it helped them, maybe it didn't. But the other thing that the Indeed Glassdoor survey said was that employee satisfaction with management went down in those organizations after that stuff happened. And so, and I don't think that means the majority of those employees that, if satisfaction went down, those less satisfied employees, doesn't mean that they were necessarily pro-life or anti-abortion. But I think people have a sense when their companies are doing things for cynical reasons.
Yeah. And that could be it. It could be something that there's a correlation there, but it's not the causation. It could be anything that's causing that. So, we'd have to delve into that a little more closely to tell. I mean, it may be, the quiet quitting. I mean, who knows?
All right.
So, but I take your point. I see what you're saying. And yeah, I agree. And I'm personally in support of a lot of this stuff, but it's like I think a lot of it can be performative. And I think it just really makes me wonder who's advising the people to do this. Not that I necessarily disagree with the content, but it's, is that the message you're intending to send? Goes back to the intentional culture. Or is that something that, I don't know. The origin's going to be different for everybody, and the issues are going to vary. But it kind of makes you wonder why the decision was made to make it more performative. And this goes on both sides, not just liberal, conservative.
Oh yeah, I agree too. Yeah, you see it. Yeah,
Sure.
You see plenty of America job postings too, especially in West Texas and those kinds of things. And
sure.
I think often that stuff. Who do we ask to do the job postings in a lot of these organizations? Our young interns or our youngest recruiters, and we give them, hey, here, go post this job. And so there's, a lot of times there's no executive decision making in a lot of this really public stuff. Whoever, you've got an intern managing your company's social media, and you've got you've got a young recruiter doing your job postings, and things happen. And when people
Mhm.
see them, their gut reaction is often, "Oh, that's a clever idea," and they're not thinking through, And I think you've got to look at, who are we trying to recruit? Is this the best way to get them? But also, who is our customer, and what is this going to, what's our broadcast? I mean, it's one thing to have, and I would support any employer that had reproductive rights
Yeah.
as a priority in their benefits package. I think that's great. It's definitely their decision to do that. But again, elevating that up beyond too high suggests to me somebody, just like you see a lot of stupid job postings that uh, are really narrow-minded, and really make it look like this organization is from 1950s Mad Men, and that's not what, their senior HR person wasn't involved in making that decision. That was some lower level person, and then the company has to do the cleanup afterwards.
Right. Yeah. And it could, I'm absolutely right. It might be a young intern doing it. It might be an external consultant that, tells the CEO, hey, look, if you want to get on the map with this younger group of very desirable professionals, here's what you got to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, the CEO, it comes from the top too.
Yeah.
So, there's all kinds of ways, but it just makes me wonder, if we're getting away from the main content of the job, that's, but then again, relating to everything else we've been talking to, I think these days people really want to know, what's this organization about? Why are they, I'm not going to go so far as to say which side are they on, but probably not too far away from that for some people.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and especially young people. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
think they want to spend, to the extent that they even want to spend any time at work, they want to spend that time in an organization that they feel lines up with their values, and I think we all do.
Yeah, but we been saying for years, keep it job related.
Right.
Everything. Keep it job related. The interview, the documentation, disciplinary action, termination. Keep it job related, and I still agree with that. We
Right.
have to. So yeah.
And while we're still talking about job seekers, Illinois is the latest state to pass a pay transparency law, and they have to have in the job posting, they have to include a pay scale, and it's got to be a good faith one, unlike some of the other ones where you could say anything between $0 and $10 million is our pay scale. It's got to be good faith, and it's got to describe the benefits in the job posting, which is interesting. But they did say you can just refer them all to a link on your generic website that details it. For this job, for this job category, here's what the pay range is, and here's what your benefits are. But transparency generally still seems to be catching on
Yeah.
more and more. What's your take on the real value of pay transparency, especially when it comes to job postings?
Well, and going off of what you just mentioned, you know, I don't know what good faith means. There have been other pay transparency requirements and laws that have come along that I don't think really got that detailed. So yeah, you'd think there's a lot of wiggle room for an employer. I'm going to publish a range, and it's going to be pretty wide. Now, personally, I'm in support of it because there's so much time wasted in the recruiting process. How many interviews are you going to go through before you really start talking about what the level of compensation is going to be, reasonably? And because I think job seekers have, they've got uh, plenty of good reasons to know because they're otherwise going to waste their time. I think it's happened to everybody. I got through this interview process and I found out they're not going to pay me what I need, and everybody's got a number they need, but it goes for employers too. It's like, do you really want to go through this exercise, commit all these resources, and then find out somebody's going to, turn your job down because you're not paying enough? So I don't see a real downside for employers. I don't, as far as legislating it, that you're required to do it, it's kind of a different issue. and I don't know how you guys do things at Imperative, but um, I think it's on balance. I think it's a good thing. How we got there, I don't think it needed to go the way it did. So hopefully, I made sense with that comment.
No, I think you're right, and I think the motivation is behind a lot of the pay transparency is the idea that some people, and I'm not convinced that I think it's overstated, but some people don't negotiate as well, and especially they say women are less likely to negotiate salary. And so they don't know what they're coming in against. And I have a hard time believing that to be accurate especially for most professionals who spent any time in their job already. But of course, if your past salary is really predicting your future salary, then if you start out in a deficit, and so at least where to start your negotiation or what the negotiation range is.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of states, Texas not one, but a lot of states have made it illegal to even inquire into past employment
Mm-hmm.
wages, which I also think is a mistake, because now especially if you've got an executive or senior management position you're negotiating salary on, and they say, or it's a sales position, and he says, well, look, just to break even from I'm making last year at this current company, I've got to have 175,000 a year. But then the employer can't ask for any verification of that. So, it doesn't leave you, and so you have to call his bluff or not. And everybody says, often you hear the argument, well, you just know what the job is worth, so you just pay that. Well, you know what the job is worth with an average employee, you know what the job is worth with an excellent employee. And sometimes, especially in a sales role or something else, income is one of the few things that really can predict how valuable at least another organization benchmarked this person as from their experience with them.
Yeah, and something like a situation like that, I mean, sometimes the employer just has to take a shot and see if it works. If it doesn't work, hopefully your HR processes are good enough to where you can get out of the situation later. But sometimes I kind of tend to agree with, well, you have an idea of what the job's worth with somebody that's a really good performer. You have an idea, especially with a sales job, of what the compensation could be for somebody like that. And if you're truthful, which you will be in a interview, it's all on the table and it's all going to be understood. And so, I think it's, again, I'll go back to saying on balance, I think it's a good thing that this is happening. I wish we didn't have to legislate it, but I think it could be an advantage, not just for job seekers, but for employers,
Oh yeah, because
just
you
in
kiss
a
a lot
lot
of
of ways.
pigs. Yeah, you can kiss a lot of pigs in
Yeah.
the employment side, looking at oh, this candidate looks great and all this, but then they come in and they're like, I couldn't afford to take this job. I'm sorry, I love your company and everything else, but I'm not taking a 10% pay cut to come work here.
Right.
And you mentioned imperative, and when we post a job, most of especially my analyst roles, they're all based on competencies. And nobody comes into this job with competencies for to do background checks and the kinds of work we do. And so everybody, when we post a job, we post, this is what you're coming in at, this is exactly what we're going to pay. And then we explain, as you gain competencies, even if it's not one you use, once you're certified as competent and cross-trained, we're going to pay you. So it just goes up incrementally. That way we know we've got a bench here that we can move people around as we need to, and keep people, keep them busy and meet our customers' expectations. And so basically in our organization, everybody pretty much knows what everybody else makes just because they know what their competencies are.
Well, and you're doing it right. And, you're sort of ahead of just about everybody else because unfortunately, most organizations don't do that. They don't have the resources to commit to tracking that sort of thing. Once you get the ball rolling on that, you got to keep track of it. And it's fantastic that you're doing that. I'm impressed, and people should be. But that's, most people don't. And so, yeah, I mean, some people, some organizations, a lot of them really maybe they need that,
That push.
forcefulness of that push to do this.
Well, and then what you have is as soon as you start posting a job range, everybody who's in that job right now says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why I've been here 7 years and you're bringing people in at the same rate that I'm making right now.
Well, but
Where should I fall in that range?
Yeah, and we've always had these salary
Right.
compression issues. I mean,
Right.
that's always been an issue. But now we all know what these numbers are, and so yeah, I mean, that's a separate problem. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's a problem for another day's podcast because we're out
Yeah.
of time. But hey, Steve, thank you again for joining me this week. It was it's always good. I don't get to see as much because you're in Austin, but next time I'm down there, if there's not some protest that shut all the bars down, then we'll get together and have another beer.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me back, and really enjoyed it.
Give my best to Megan.
Will do. Thanks.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.